Hey everyone, this is Greg Rajewski at the Roaring Woodwork. This week, I worked on the Rockler Plywood Challenge by the Modern Maker podcast. I started with a simple design in SketchUp and mapped out my cut list and color coordinated it. Makes it a little bit easier when I get to actually cutting everything out, which I'm doing here. Based on the cut list, I was able to get a solid cut all the way through the middle of the sheet. From there, I was able to cross-cut all of the different parts. I cut everything at once, so it was nice and consistent. From here I put the 45-degree bevel on all the pieces of the cabinet. The rip capacity on my table saw is about 30 or 32 inches, so I added an auxiliary stop block here, and that helped me get the 40-inch cut that I needed. I put this little collar on the inside of the domino, which really just prevented me from plunging too far. I think this was better suited for the smaller version, but I didn't want to buy two of them. After the dominoes, I worked on the laminations for both the feet and the stretchers, which I wanted to be essentially 1.5 inches or twice the thickness of normal plywood. I think it looks nice when it's a little beefy. I started the next day by gluing the cabinet together with the little 5mm dominoes. These really helped with alignment. I don't really know how I would have done this otherwise, other than with biscuits. Those would work just fine here. I got these nice corner clamps that help keep things nice and square. And piece by piece, I just attached the cabinet together, making sure to get lots of glue in there. Back to the laminations, I took it to the edge sander, since when I glued it together it shifted a little bit, which was fine, I accounted for that. This was much wider than I needed it to be, but I wanted a clean surface to register off of my table saw fence when I ripped it down to the size that I needed for the feet. I took it to the miter saw and cut 15-degree bevels on them. Now these are doubled up, so for each parallelogram here I can get 2 tapered feet out of it, which I'm marking out here. I have a janky little tapering jig here, but it's zero clearance, so I just line up the pencil marks on the edge of the sled and run it right through the table saw. I take the blank that comes off here, flip it around, and clean that up. I only have to measure once, and then you can cut all 4 feet to the exact same size. I like to make the stretchers as thick as the widest part of the taper in the feet. So the feet in this case I believe were 1.75 inches. Then I added the dominoes to the feet and to all the stretchers. I used I doubled up on 6mm tenons here since I had more material to work with. Then I glued them together. I did this in 2 phases, so I glued the side stretchers to the feet individually, and then later I attached the longer rails to these 2 pieces. I used some 15-degree offcuts to put inside of the clamps, basically to even out the clamping pressure. Then I cut the middle divider to size, measuring off of the inside of the side of the cabinet rather than the middle. This is the Chris Salamone 4 eyes method for making sure you get very minimal bowing. Then I attached it with some screws, and then I made some in-grain plywood plugs just to see if it could work. And then I ripped them out at the bandsaw, and this was really fun to do. Now that the cabinet was dry and ready to work with, I started working on the door. I cut the corners off on all the door pieces at 45 degrees, measuring again from the inside of the cabinet opening itself. I reinforced all of the joints with dominoes, which you could also do with pocket holes or dowels or biscuits. And then I started cutting out all of the strips. I set the stop block about 3/64ths of an inch, which was totally arbitrary, on the outside of the blade. After each cut, I would move the board over just to touch it, not actually bend all of the individual feather pieces. I lined up all of the strips here, and then I taped them together on the edge and then clamped them to my workbench. This kept them from moving around and allowed me to really put some force into making the weave nice and tight. So basically just feed one piece through, start wrestling it back, kind of like playing the piano. And I actually only broke one in this whole process, and it was near the end, so it was easy to take back out. Luckily I had cut quite a few extras. Going by some of the posts I made on Instagram during this took about an hour and a half. On the next morning, I stuck the panel into the frame, glued it together with a little bit of tape on the edges of the joints just to keep the glue from getting all over the surface, and let that sit in the clamps. In the meantime, I turned to a 1/8 inch roundover bit just to clean up all of the surfaces on the cabinet and the door itself, and then I sanded everything up to 180 grit. This jig makes it really easy for lining up the 35mm holes. I used inset hinges so the door is inside of the cabinet rather than on the outside like in a kitchen. I clamped some scraps to the front and pushed the door up against it, filled the spaces with cards, and then screwed the hinges to the body itself. Once that was done, I went back to the base and started drilling some holes so that I could screw it into the bottom of the cabinet. Then I cut some strips down to attach the shelves to the inside of the cabinet. If I were doing this with hardwood, I'd rather use dados, but it is plywood. Then I used the shelf on its side as a spacer to attach the supports for the shelf. Then I laid out some marks and drilled holes for the door handle. To make the handle, I used one of the leftover pieces that already had a 15-degree bevel on it, and then I cut 15-degree miters on each end of that to match the base. Then I applied 2 coats of General Finishes Armor Seal and satin. I think a sprayer would do a great job here, but I didn't have one. I tend to do a lot of work with hardwood, so a plywood challenge really was a challenge in the sense of incorporating it in a way that didn't hide it. I thought a tweed panel was a great way to go, and I'm really happy that this idea came to me with only a few days left in the challenge. The Thanks for coming by and watching this build. If you guys like what you saw, I would love it if you'd subscribe. I've got a couple of videos coming out in the next few weeks, like this little mid-century modern bookshelf and this mid-century modern king-size bed in walnut. Thanks to the guys at Modern Maker Podcast for creating such an awesome challenge. It was so cool to see everyone's pieces, from Johnny Build's chairs back on day one, which intimidated everyone, to all the ones that have come out since. Alright, I'll see you guys soon.